Hello, and welcome everybody to another episode of Pod Strickland. I'm your host, Shwin. In this episode 363, I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Stacy. That's at StacyPat89 on Twitter. Stacy, how are you doing on this fine Monday morning?
Finally got some snow. Doing pretty well. Nervous for the game tonight.
Yes, the game is happening tonight, and we are looking forward to it, which is the national championship game, not a Knicks game. But before we get started, I do have to make a few announcements. First, being that the Strickland has an Instagram, check that out. That is at the Strickland Online on Instagram, posting all kinds of new content on there. Strickland also has a YouTube channel where you may be watching this podcast. If you are not done so already, please hit like and then subscribe to the channel. That would be a huge help to us. Strickland also has merchandise, which is available on our website at www.thestrick.land. There's a link that'll take you to our store. There's all kinds of cool stuff on there. T-shirts, sweatshirts, hats, coffee mugs, water bottles, you name it, we've got it. Strickland also has a Patreon, which you can subscribe to. There are a number of different tiers. There's a $6 tier that gets you access to Pod Strickland, the podcast that I host every Friday with Prez. You also get access to Takes from Obvious Bozos, our newest podcast hosted by Andrew Steele, a.k.a. Doug, along with Zach Blatter. And you also get access to the Strickland Discord, where the conversation never stops. There are further tiers. There's a $9 tier that gets you access to Strickland Roll, my solo pod, where I rant and rave about the Knicks and more. You also get access to wonderful premium articles by Matthew Miranda, one of the best in the business. And now you also get access to Strictly NFL, our newest podcast, which, you guessed it, is about the NFL. That comes out every week. That is hosted by Constantine Metricos and Jeffrey Rasmussen. There are further tiers. There's a $15 tier, $30 tier, $50 tier, and $100 tier. Those come with a variety of additional benefits, like listening on pod recordings, merchandise discounts, and even potentially co-hosting a podcast alongside yours truly one day, whether you choose to subscribe or not. None of this would be possible without you. And none of this would be possible without BetOnline. All the major sports are in action this week with the college football playoffs. We're ready to kick off. BetOnline is your number one destination for all your sports wagering info, including news for pro football, the NBA, upcoming fights, and NHL games this season. Head to the website today to get into the action and see all the updated odds for the week. Remember to use promo code BELIEVE, BLEAV, to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, where the game starts. Yes, so the Knicks are on a 4-game winning streak since they have traded for OG Anunoby. They have kicked teams' asses. They currently have, in this 4-game sample, they have the longest winning streak right now in the league. They're the only team that's 4-0 over their last 4 games, so shout out to them.
Never lost.
Never lost. They have the second best net rating in the league over that time at 17.7. They rank 22nd in assist percentage at 62%, which may seem low to some, but is a stark improvement over what they were doing prior to that. They are 10th in offensive rating, 120.8. They are second in defensive rating, 103.1. They are also all the way up to 22nd in pace at 98.25, which again may seem minor to some, but it's a significant difference from what they were doing prior. They still kick ass on the glass. They're 5th in offensive rebounding. They are 1st in defensive rebounding over that time. Everything says everything said they were good before. Everything is saying that they're continuing to be they're good and much better than that now. They have played Minnesota.
There's another G word you can use there. I would say they're great now. They are elite.
They might be. They beat Minnesota. In their first game, Minnesota struggled a little bit. They got defeated yesterday by Dallas in a very weird game. And very annoying if you bet on Minnesota to cover the spread. But yeah, they beat Minnesota. They beat
Philly.
Philly. They beat somebody else in between.
Chicago. It was Chicago and Washington, and then 2 contenders. And Chicago's been playing better.
Chicago's been playing better, but they were a little shorthanded, so fine. Washington.
Philly was apparently completely shorthanded too, right?
Yeah, well, Washington is Washington, and Philly didn't have DeAnthony Melton, and who cares? The Knicks didn't have Mitchell Robinson. I don't hear anybody, was crying for them.
Melted down about that.
Yeah, but the Knicks absolutely beat the shit out of Philly it's their best win of the season, not really close. I'll be shocked if they have a better win this season, just on the road against a perceived contender and absolutely destroying them from start to finish. I guess not from start to finish. They were down 10 at one point early in the game. But they were down 26-16, if I remember correctly. And from that point forward, they outscored them by 46 points the rest of the way. So a pretty thorough, dominant ass-kicking on the road. Again, I don't know. The team is really good, and I think it's safe to say that the OG trade I still have some misgivings over not the trade itself, but I have some misgivings over. I don't like the idea that we can already say the Knicks have won the trade or that either side has won the trade. Although I think it's very hard for the Raptors to lose the trade because they were going to lose OG and Anunoby anyway. I have a tough time already saying the Knicks have won the trade, but the Knicks certainly seem to have won in the immediate term after the trade, and I think they have pushed their ceiling higher for at least the next year or two, given the trade for OG. It's on them to capitalize on that now too, given the flexibility they have. But again, the early returns for the Knicks are great. I think he's given you everything you could have wanted with how he's influenced the team, even if he himself individually is still trying to find his place, particularly on offense. So yeah, I mean, it's just really exciting to watch this team play at this level, and also with the understanding that like they have the capacity to make further moves. I still think they need another ball handler. Deuce has played better, but him in the half court still to me is a bridge too far. Also a good movie, but a bridge too far, and I don't know. I would worry about that, but for right now, I think I can be pretty happy as a Knicks fan about everything we've seen.
Yeah, I mean, I think the takes can fly at this point. They're a contender. Everyone says Philly's a contender.
I don't think Philly's a contender. I never thought they were a contender.
They have been viewed that way, and the Knicks didn't just beat them. To your point, they absolutely took them out to the woodshed. And OG hasn't even become that comfortable with the offense. You mentioned the defensive rebounding; that had been an issue. And they played Embiid. They played a really physical front line in Minnesota, and they've been rebounding the ball extremely well. I think that's the part of it that even I didn't anticipate as much with the OG trade.
And they dominated against Minnesota to the point that I think after the game, Chris Finch said something like they kicked our asses or they bullied us or whatever it was. But he effectively, indicated that like the Knicks manhandled them.
Yeah, and you saw it right off the bat. OG that game, I think he hit 4 threes, 4 for 6 from 3 or something like that. Obviously, really good defense on Anthony Edwards, who's going to get his, but the Knicks didn't really have that kind of an answer. And I'm actually looking forward to the Tuesday game because against Dallas, the Knicks have not really had a consistent answer for Luka, right? They'll throw RJ on him for physicality. He's a solid defender.
Do you think Ant asked OG where he's from originally?
Should sound whack.
England should sound whack.
I think, but the Knicks haven't really had someone who can match up. I mean, they don't want to put Randle on him, so it'll be fun because this is the first time I think we've gone to that matchup with someone with the size and physicality. And I think all of us probably we know OG's a good defender, but how real that is, just how impactful he is across the board. I think it's been big. I think it is a win-win so far. RJ went off last night. I think in a somewhat perplexing mood, Kerr went to Wiggins a lot on quickly and put Steph on RJ, and that's the kind of scenario where RJ really thrives, and it shows the respect that Quickly's getting. So I think that trade's been good for them. But getting back to the Knicks,
yeah, it's been great for them. By the way, I think it's just like honestly, just looking at it from both teams. Just sorry, not to interrupt, but like I think it's pretty simple. Like both teams had somewhat of an excess of the other thing the team needed. I think for the Raptors, I wouldn't even say OG was an excess, but he was a guy that was he was leaving. Yeah, he was leaving. So it's like, can we get something for him? The Knicks, we got to be clear about this. Even if OG had hit the market this summer as an unrestricted free agent, I mean, he's going to probably do that anyway. But like now that they have acquired him, obviously they can go over the cap, whatever. But they had no avenue to acquire him if they didn't trade for him. And a sign and trade would have been very complicated. The math is a lot harder, obviously. Quickly using him in such a transaction would be very difficult. So for them, this was important. They didn't have a big wing defender, something that people had lamented. And I've said this since we got him. I think I totally underestimated how much they missed that player and how much he could balance a lot of things on the roster. But the Knicks needed that. And look, the Raptors did not have good guard play. They've had one guard the last 2 years since Lowry left. Basically, they've just had Van Vliet.
That's Schroeder, but yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah. So it's like, well, you get kind of the benefit, right? Because you move Schroeder to the bench where he's actually good. Like that's where he's had success.
He's been good with Quickly too. We've had some success with both of them. So
yeah,
and he has a little bit of size. So
Yeah, so like that's where he's had success in his career. Obviously, quickly archetype, he fits well off of Scotty Barnes. RJ he shot really well from three since he's got to Toronto, especially last night. I'm just gonna be honest, like I need to see this. Like we've seen RJ, we saw this at the start of this year, right? We saw the start of this year. We were like, oh my god, RJ shooting well, and when he shoots well from three, it changes everything for him as a player. It changes everything for him as a player. And some of the defensive issues you don't care about as much. Some of the passing, and his passing was really good yesterday too, which was another thing we liked at the start of the year. We're like, oh my god, he's passing so well. This is amazing. I need to see this for like 2 months.
That passing shit comes real easy when you're shooting the ball well.
Yeah, well, I just want to see it from him for 2 months because like I've seen the stuff from him constantly in his career. We saw him put up last year. I think he scored what? He had like a 44-point game or something against Chicago. The next game he comes out, shoots like shit. We were talking about this in our Discord yesterday. The problem with RJ Barrett has never been that you don't see the highs. That's never the problem. The problem is that the lows
are awful.
The lows are inevitable, and he's often at lows or middles way too often compared to his highs. So finding that consistency and establishing a higher baseline of performance consistently is the key for him. And I genuinely feel this. Like, I don't care if he ends up becoming awesome in Toronto, because it was never going to happen for him in New York. It just wasn't. And the Knicks couldn't wait for him. They didn't have the latitude to give him. They didn't have the leeway to give him, given just like, again, how good they are, as we're seeing after the OG trade. And I mean, we saw it before, but you're really seeing it now. And like, he needed to go to a different situation. And hopefully this is the situation for him. I still suspect that at the end of the day, we're going to look at his scoring efficiency out of the season. It'll be around, 53 and a half, 54 or something. Maybe he'll peak at like 55 this year or something. And that will be his kind of like, he's made a step in his career. But I don't think the Knicks are going to be regretful about trading him in this trade. And I don't think the Raptors need to hold him to the same standard, which helps a lot for him. It helps that when he played like shit in the previous game, they benched him. He didn't close the game, right? He didn't close the game before that when they beat Memphis. He came in very briefly for a possession or two, and that was about it. But like, they didn't close the game with him on the floor. It helps because they don't have to worry about what is it going to look like if we bench the third overall pick who we gave $107 million. The understanding of what he is in Toronto is very different than what is ever going to be in New York, and that's good for him. I think that's good for them. And obviously they got Quickly in the deal too, who's been very, very good for them. And also, I will say this, it also helped they played an opponent yesterday who is, one, the Warriors are absolutely free-falling right now, and two, they have zero rim protection, especially without Draymond there. So that was a good match. And they're not athletic. They're probably are they the least athletic team in the league? They're one of them. Aside from Kuminga, it's not exactly a team of uber athletes over there. So, well, maybe they are a team of uber athletes.
No,
but
Wiggins is pretty athletic still.
When he cares about basketball, I guess. But yeah, like it was a good game for him, a good game for them, and honestly, a good trade for both teams. They're 3-1 since the trade. The Knicks are 4-0 since the trade. I'll just look it up real quick since I'm on it anyway. Since the trade, the Raptors are 12th in net rating at 4.7, and they played a pretty difficult schedule, if I'm not mistaken. They played Cleveland at home, they played Memphis away, they played Sacramento away, and then they played Golden State away. So pretty solid stretch for them. They play at,
and even the game they lost was at Sacramento. I mean, they came all the way back and nearly won that.
Yeah. And they're playing they're 10th in the league in pace. This is something you've talked about. This should benefit RJ Barrett playing in a faster system, faster team. So that hopefully holds up for him and them. And I mean, look, they are, since the trade, they are, they are 21st in defensive rating. Not great, but they are 3rd in offensive rating, 123.6. We'll see if that sustains. Either way, I think the immediate dividends, to the point you were making, for them and for us, have been really good. And even if they are an aberration of what the true level is, I think it's pretty clear both teams are going to benefit from this deal.
Yeah, and we'll see what happens with Siakam. They'll probably get some nice pieces there. But I mean, going back to OG too, I think it's also,
by the way, unrelated. Do you think if they got Jarris Walker as like the quickly return of a Siakam trade, that would be a good get for them? Or were you a Jarris guy?
I do like Jarris a lot. I think he's still ironing out some edges. I think It could be somewhat of an RJ type situation. I think he's a very different player, but Indiana is now kind of. This was one of the things that was maybe has been a little bit unfortunate for RJ, where he, the Knicks, he had his rookie year, then immediately became a playoff team, right? And they've had the expectations next to Julius that you're going to get more from that position, which maybe might have been a little bit too much to put on his plate. He had a good playoffs last year. So this might be a little bit of a less pressure situation. And that might be what Walker needs, right? On a team that isn't looking to contend this year. I don't know if Indiana's going to contend, but they're clearly in the mix and they probably want to win at least the playoff series. I like Walker. I think you'd have to be a little bit creative with him, but because the spacing isn't there. So if they're playing Barnes, I'd like to see them use Walker a little bit to 5. I think that could be interesting. I could see them maybe getting a guy like Jalen Johnson, who, with his athleticism.
You think can they complete the vision and bring Obi home?
I don't know that Indiana wants to let go of him, but if they're trading for Siakam, then yeah, I mean, that would make sense, right? I don't know if that Toronto's going to want all the power forwards, and I imagine they would prefer Walker. Yeah, they don't want to recreate Bobby Portis and Taj Gibson and that memorable team.
Illustrious Knicks front court.
Marcus Morris. And
shout out to Marcus Morris. We don't get OG Anunoby without him.
Yeah, the trade that keeps giving.
Forgiving trade.
I think that, but I'll go back to OG. Like literally all of the weaknesses we've talked about almost for this Knicks team from last year. What were the things we talked about? Randle is a liability on defense. He had that one stinker on offense. And I think Benji gave him a C+. Like usually if Randle shoots 1 for 11, it's an F because he doesn't give you anything else, right? And there was one play that stuck out. And I think I praised them. People on my Twitter were like, he's playing like shit. And I was like, there was one play where he had a bad miss from 3. I think it hit off the backboard or it was really short. Long rebound. What usually happens? He puts his head down, starts just doing his little shuffle back. He got all the way back and prevented a fast break layup. That's just something you don't see. So he's playing with a lot more energy. The other thing is Brunson's been getting double digits assists now in the reg. And that was another thing we've talked about where as good as he's been, the playmaking and the distribution, it stagnated a little bit against Miami. There's a bunch of reasons for that. I'm certainly not going to put that all on him, but that's been opened up now, right? Grimes is playing with more confidence. DiVincenzo, I think he'd been playing well before. Now, like with more ball movement and all of that, you're seeing all the things you wanted to see. And I think that part of the reason you mentioned getting OG in free agency, but the time was now. Like the fact I've mentioned this a lot, Brunson is next year on his last year of this good deal. For all the talk about Brunson, can he be your best offensive player? I think it's much more feasible when he's making $25 million a year, or whatever it is. And
we're seeing now that passing shit does come easy to Jalen Brunson.
Real hooper. And he's, so now is the time to strike. And by that, I'm not saying that I'll be disappointed if they don't make the Eastern Conference Finals or the Finals, but that is a very realistic goal for them this year. And I expect them, I've been on record. I'm not really a fan of them bringing in DeJounte Murray, but if they made that, I could at least get kind of the urgency. I don't think you get rid of Grimes, and I think you try to avoid trading unprotected first. That's why I think both of us are in on Brogdon, but this team is there now. Besides Boston, I'm pretty confident against Milwaukee's defense is a train wreck. We saw that they can match up pretty well with Philly. We'll see if they can rely on Hartenstein quite as much as they have been. This team is there. And I think you just get one more piece, maybe get a backup big. I wouldn't mind them going after Olynyk still. But they're there.
I think the big thing that pops and I know RJ's had a really good start in Toronto, but I was thinking about tweeting this, and maybe I still will because I think it'll do numbers, as the kids say. But one trade changes so much the dynamic of your team, and you don't necessarily realize it as when it happens until you feel like you see it. And since the trade, one thing that's really stood out to me is the overall athleticism of the group now is higher. Not that Quickly was a pretty decent athlete for what he is, not an elite one, obviously. RJ was he's not an elite wing athlete. He's at best, an average wing athlete for an NBA standard. OG is not like the normal eye-popping athleticism you may associate with the high flyers of the NBA, but he's very athletic. Like some of these catches, these gathers
The
and he
dunks in
throws,
traffic. He gets it. It's like, oh, how's he going to finish that?
he
just
doesn't need to
rises
load
up.
up. There's no load up time. He just goes up with it. It's kind of like rookie Mitchell Robinson, where you were like, holy shit, what the fuck? But it's just freakish how quickly he can grab the ball and go up with it. And then the other thing that's really stood out is like there was a lot of complaints, valid ones, prior to the trade about like this team is so small, like we can't match up with this team. We don't have the size overall, blah blah blah. Like yeah, the front court's big, but 1 to 3, and we don't have a small ball 4, and like all this stuff was valid. One trade, literally one trade, OG for RJ and Quick, and now all of a sudden this team is like fucking physically imposing in a lot of ways. I mean, that OG Randle Hartenstein starting front court is monstrous. Like they're just enveloped the court. It's kind of crazy. And I think that's part of the reason why Randle's has improved defensively is like he doesn't have to stick to his man in the same type of way. And his role is different where it's like, oh my God, we're playing some awesome 3 or awesome 4 that is bigger than RJ Barrett. Like he doesn't have to worry about that now because OG can cover that stuff. And OG can switch off, right? We've seen OG guard Embiid at times. We've seen OG guard Cat at times. We've seen OG switch on to Rudy Gobert. We've seen OG switch on to, whoever, like Andre Drummond. He is capable of any and all types of matchups on a given possession. And that gives you a lot of leeway, and I think that helps Randle a lot. But the other thing is, too, and I still do not buy that this lineup is going to work against quality opponents or more quality opponents over a longer span. But that Josh Hart at the 2 with OG at the 3 lineup, they've been kicking ass defensively with them. That part I do think is sustainable. I do think that is like a really good defensive lineup where it's like Hart, OG, Randle, Hartenstein. I think that one will work. But I think offensively that's always going to be rough, given like how much pressure it puts on Randle and Brunson. And now you don't have great spacing because Hart is obviously not that great of a spacer. But those lineups for now have been really good. And more than, forgetting what the long-term concerns are, it just shows you like all of a sudden when you have Hart at the 2, like that's a very physically imposing lineup. Like you're one undersized guy, there's Brunson at the 1. And I always think like Brunson being undersized when you're just comparing him to ones is kind of stupid. Like I don't really feel that way about it.
And he is physical, right? I mean,
right. Yeah. And so it just, to me, like all of a sudden this team has gone from skilled but undersized, and their strength is the depth and not so much like what their top end groups can do, versus now where it feels like, okay, this team is really strong physically. They have good size. They have a variety of size they can throw at you. They're physically imposing again. And then the other part that I really think is interesting, and again, it's like one of those things where you don't realize it until maybe you see it, but now you have like a pretty good modern wing rotation, or at least if you want to phrase it more properly, like you have a solid set of options from 2 to 4, like Hart, Grimes, OG, Randle, obviously, even DiVincenzo as he plays the 2, obviously for the Knicks, and I wouldn't even throw Deuce in there, even though Thibs has been reluctant to use him there because we've seen Deuce play as the off guard before and have a lot of success with that. But like, especially that Grimes, OG, Hart, like set of true wings, like that's like a very modern and versatile and diverse wing rotation. It's like what the Knicks have not had. And I still obviously, look, I think you can use another wing at some point. Probably, hopefully they draft one they can develop. But like, a guy like Brogdon, if you add him, given his size as a ball handler, I think just adds more versatility to this group that the Knicks have now. And he'd be a really interesting addition. And I hope that the Knicks get him because I think he is the superior stopgap, middle ground, alternative, whatever you want to call it, to for the Knicks after having traded Emmanuel quickly. But like, if they get him, all of a sudden you've got really good size now available at almost every spot, and you're strong. You've become a stronger team, right? Just in terms of physical strength. Brogdon's also a good shooter. The Knicks are a really good shooting team this year. Like, I think you're just adding strengths, and I'd be happy to bring him in. And also, I think they need to bring in a ball handler more so than a big, because even after the trade, we've seen Thibs be very reluctant to lean into like small ball Randle at the 5, even with OG available to play the 4. I think if you bring in Brogdon, whether he does or doesn't, Brogdon would be a very interesting guy to have in variations of a Randle at the 5 lineup for a variety of reasons, given his size and dribble penetration and shooting. So that's a deal I hope does get done. But like forgetting that part of it, it's interesting how much one trade can change the perception and dynamics of a team.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth noting too. I before the season, I went through the schedule, and I remember like getting to like this point, and then being like, "Oh, I have them at 20-16. They're now 21-15." And it kind of shows just how many road games they've played, right? And this was the point where I thought they could really go on a run, and I think they're well set up for that. I think that the 4 seed is very much in reach. I think that's not to say that there wasn't a need to make this kind of a move. I think beyond the fact that they were 17-15, the way that they had been losing games, right? Just it felt like they had to score 130 or 120 or they weren't going to win because they just couldn't lock anybody up. I do think the backup big is a pretty pressing need as well. I don't think that they trust Precious right now. We'll see if he gets more comfortable. Sims is reliable, I think, probably more than they've used him. I would like to see him get a shot. But I mean, Hartenstein is playing 39 minutes. I don't really think that's sustainable. So it'll be very interesting to see. I think beyond what you mentioned, Brogdon also is going to be pretty cheap. I think this is a little bit of a tricky area to fill, right? We've talked about with Murray, is he going to be happy coming off the bench? You want someone who can, but the guys who are pure bench guys, aren't really filling that third ball handler void. They'll take the backup minutes off Brunson. They'll help rest him, but they're not really someone you can close with in those games where you might need a third creator, right? And sometimes they have to be okay with not closing ahead of DiVincenzo if he's got it going, and if that isn't as much of a need. So the guys who are really capable of being a true third option aren't going to be happy coming off the bench. And the guys who would be fine coming off the bench, for a lot of them, it's not exactly the quickly thing because he also had kind of financial motivations in play. But so it becomes a little bit tricky, although I think it's still obviously an easier need to fill than what the Knicks were at before, which is needing like some kind of a big wing to give them what OG's giving them. And I think that's where Brogdon fits. At this point in his career on a contender, I think he'll be fine coming off the bench, again, getting his 20-25 minutes. But he's also a good enough ball handler to be a third option. He's had experience on contending teams. And he gives you shooting, so he should be able to fit in well with that starting lineup. And he can probably run the bench. Or at least, if you want to keep playing Deuce, take off some of that burden, right? Because I think we've seen with Deuce in, they're even having Josh Hart run a lot of sets. I don't necessarily, I'm not in love with that, to put it mildly. So, but the question is, if it's really just Fournier and a protected first, it seems like almost a no-brainer. And I'm curious why it hasn't happened yet. But, I mean, he is clutch, so maybe that whole thing needs to be cleared up. Tomorrow's the first day DeJounte Murray can get traded, so we'll see if something comes to fruition there. Given all the noise, I would imagine, what's going on in Atlanta, it happens pretty quick. Yeah. I mean, any kind of Murray trade, wherever he goes, I think it's going to happen pretty quick after he's allowed to be traded. And I believe it's January 9th.
I mean, I don't really think the Knicks are going to get DeJounte Murray. I don't really know why that was. I think people have made a lot of wild assumptions based on things they may have heard about Clutch and the Knicks. Although I find the entire Clutch thing extremely stupid. Like, yeah, Leon Rose is going to go kiss Rich Paul's ass. Like, give me a fucking break, dude.
He needs to sit down.
Yeah, he's going to have to sit down. Like, what? Him and you think they'll call in Junior?
Call it, or no, it'll be like they go to Brooklyn, right? It's like
the Junior had to be on the phone call, remember? See the
and then he's gonna bring in Sam Rose, and then I remember you used to sit in the car, and as far as I'm concerned, you should still be there.
But yeah, I don't know. Brogdon to me just makes a lot more sense than DeJounte. Like DeJounte's gonna come here, he's gonna want to start. Because that's what he is. He's been a starter, right, for the last however many years. He's at a different point in his career than Brogdon. Brogdon's 31. I don't know this for sure, but I would assume, given his age, and generally that's an age where guys tend to feel more strongly about, like, especially if they haven't won a championship, I would rather be on a competitive team than a team that is
Portland.
Yeah, and they're more willing and accepting of buying into a different role for the success of that team. And DeJounte, to me, feels like a guy who's very much not feels like, he is a guy that's very much in the prime of his career. He obviously made a huge kind of a blockbuster move when he went from San Antonio to Atlanta. That hasn't worked out. I feel like he'll be motivated to justify that and kind of prove himself. And I just don't know that he can prove himself in the way he would like to, probably by coming off the bench in New York. And I also got to say, like, I don't love this idea of, like, oh, well, it's not that you're getting DeJounte Murray for, yes, you'll deal with him for the year, but, like, he'll be the name that you can move out in a star trade next summer. And it's like, I don't love the halfway home concept of trading. Like, I don't. I think the Knicks I think they tried to play this game at a much lower stakes level with Cam Reddish. That did not work out. Obviously, they salvaged it, but they had to attach a first to go get and throw another salary filler to go get Josh Hart, which I'm fine with. That happens. It's not a problem for me. They took a low risk on Cam Reddish, didn't work out. But I think the idea was the same concept of, like, well, Cam Reddish is more valuable than the Charlotte protected first round pick. So let's get him. And then, if you remember, within like a few weeks or months even of that trade, there were the rumors at the deadline that they were already trying to move on from Cam Reddish to the Lakers for a first round pick from them. So it felt like they were doing the halfway home thing there. And obviously we know they never had a clear role for Cam. They didn't bother to really clear space for him. So I wonder if, like, they've learned from that. And if they have learned from it, I think that they should be very cautious if they try to apply the same logic to somebody like DeJounte Murray, given how volatile of a personality he can be and just how much more demanding he will be about his role. So I'd be very cautious about that. I think another clutch guy, actually, funny enough, that could fit the bill for them in terms of bench scoring, bench ball handling, whatever, how we're going to phrase it, would be somebody like Jordan Clarkson, who's been playing pretty well in Utah. I think he's probably superfluous to what they need or want over there. And I'm sure that Danny Ainge is looking forward to disassembling a team that seems to be finding itself and playing good basketball, because that's not what he wants this team to do currently, I don't think. So I wonder if Jordan Clarkson would not be available or of interest to them. And then, they have Colin Sexton too. I think he's played himself off the trading block. He's young. He's locked in on a good contract, and he's playing the best ball of his career. So I just don't know why Utah would trade him unless you really made it worth their time. And are the Knicks going to make an offer that's worth their time for Colin Sexton? Because a deal like that could theoretically, set back their hopes of acquiring a superstar this summer, or, in the next 12 to 18 months. So I don't know. Brogdon, to me, just feels like it fits the bill and should be easiest to negotiate given his contract, given the state of the Blazers, and kind of given what the Knicks need. But we will see what they do. They are interested in him, which is good to hear. But we'll see if they get it done. But if they do get it done, I think this team is very, very dangerous in the East. I think they're poised to probably at least make a second round of the playoffs. And to your point about, like, are they contenders? Are they not? I still don't feel great about a matchup against Boston. I think they would at least have the firepower potentially to match up with Boston if Randle shows up. But defensively, I still think Boston presents challenges to them that they don't quite have the personnel for yet, even if they're closer. But getting Brogdon definitely helps. I think it moves the needle pretty significantly for the Knicks if they can acquire him.
Yeah, and they haven't faced a true 5-out. I mean, Embiid will step out. Cat played some 5. I mean, it's worth noting. I mean, Boston is certainly the best team in the East. They might be the best team in the league. Clippers have been playing great. Obviously, Denver is still a threat. So that is just a very difficult challenge, period. I think that so on the Murray thing, it is worth noting, I think, that on offense, it has worked probably better than I think we're giving them a little bit of credit for in Atlanta. They're putting up, with him and Trey on the floor, 120 offensive ratings. So it is a good offensive team, even though the fit is a little clunky between those two. It's the defense that's concerning for me. He had the ACL injury. It just hasn't been impactful in Atlanta. But I think if you get, the difference between him or a guy like Clarkson, and this goes Brogdon and a guy like Clarkson, I do think they'll want at least one more defender. I think you end up seeing if they play Boston tomorrow, you would see a lot of Grimes on Jaylen Brown, and that's probably not ideal. I am curious. I wonder if you'd almost prefer OG on KP at some point, right? Just because but then you have Tatum as a problem, right? So I wonder, there are things they can do. Maybe you get another wing defender, right? I know Mikal Bridges has been talked about. It doesn't look like the Nets want to move on from him. That is something against Boston specifically they might need, another wing defender to really. But it's worth mentioning Brogdon has close to a 7-foot wingspan, so he helps you there. But I think like there's very little to critique about this team, and I'm going to go. I mean, I don't know that there's too many number one options. I don't want to harp on that quote or whatever. But I will say this: what Brunson is doing is he's outplaying Steph Curry this year. I mean, Steph Curry is more efficient, but Brunson's been passing the ball a little bit better. Obviously they've been winning. And if you look at Curry's stats from the the first time they won it, he won MVP. They're pretty similar. Obviously, that was before the real 3-point explosion and everything. So maybe those stats wouldn't be good enough to win MVP this year. But I mean, it's just like Brunson has just been on fire all season long, and I think it's a large enough sample to say this is who he is. He's a 40+ 3-point shooter. He can obviously score at the rim. The mid-range game is you can't ignore it, and he's been passing the ball better. And I don't know. There's just these small tweaks that I think they can make. Maybe it doesn't elevate them over Boston, but that is a stacked team with a very difficult matchup problem they present with Porzingis. In addition, obviously, to all the wing talent. So besides that, though, I think that, and maybe you would lose to the greatness of Giannis if you play Milwaukee. Philly over 7 games, they take a toll, right? Melton does give them a little bit of a physical identity. It's going to be very interesting, but do you think they still go after a guy like Olynyk?
No. I mean, I hope they don't. I wouldn't. I hope they definitely don't, because I mean, I just don't want to give Thibs another big man. It's pretty simple to me.
I mean, he's right now. I mean, Hardenstein is playing so many minutes, though, right? If there's no viable option behind it,
there's viable options. It's on Thibs to figure it out. I'm not really interested in giving him more options to justify not playing Randle at the 5.
I mean, there are precious few minutes you can sit Hardenstein, and those haven't gone so well. So
there are probably ways to pivot the roster without getting another big man. If he can't figure that out, that's his problem.
Well, the thing is, Randle is also playing a lot of minutes, right? So is that kind of the solution you'd go with? More Randle at the 5 with OG at the 4?
What?
Would your preferred solution? I mean, I'm assuming you're not a big fan of Precious Achiuwa minutes right now, right?
No, not at all.
So would your solution be just more Randle at the 5? He is also playing a lot of minutes right now, right? So
right, he's playing a lot of minutes. So why can't he play the 5 in a lot of those minutes? Like, this is my point: is he wants to present this, or as people, not him. I tend to believe this is how he wants to present it, but people want to present this as, oh my God, he needs a backup 5, and I reject that. I think he's going to play, like, the way I view it is this: he's going to play Randle 40 minutes a night minimum in the playoffs. I think that's fair to say. Like, that will be his average. What did Randle average last year in the playoffs? And you got to remember, that's skewed because he goes out early in that fucking game 5 against Cleveland. But I imagine that when he played and was available for whole games, he was averaging something like 40 minutes a game. Brunson's going to play something like 40 minutes a game. Hartenstein might play something like, because bigs, 7-footers generally tend to play a little bit less. Say he plays 36 minutes a game. Between Randle 40, he's probably going to play more than that, by the way. It'll probably be like 43 or something. Between Randle at that, Hartenstein at his number, you can, and having OG, you should be able to figure out, you should have enough. So I think that if he can handle that, or I think he should be able to handle that, and I think any coach in the NBA in 2024 should be able to handle that if they have a Julius Randle at their disposal and they have an OG and an Obi at their disposal. If he can't figure that out, that's unfortunate, and that'll probably cost the Knicks some games. But that says more to me about him as a coach than it does about the roster. If the Knicks can go get Kelly Olynyk for like Precious Chua and nothing or some shit like that, which isn't even possible. But let's say if they can get it back up big for effectively nothing, sure, go for it. But I'm not going out of my way to get him one. I'm not wasting assets on one. They have 4 bigs on the roster right now. One who is injured, obviously, Mitchell Robinson, Hartenstein, Sims, Precious, and they have Randle, who can play the 5 and has played the 5 at various times in his career.
And now you have the kind of defensive 4, especially on the glass. Now it looks like who can make that a little bit more viable than
yes. And if you're worried about the rebounding, Hart can play the 3, DiVincenzo can play the 2. They're both very high level plus rebounders for their position. Will you be as good a defensive rebounding team as you are when Hartenstein or Mitchell Robinson is on the floor? No. You might be a better offensive team though, which is the point, right? Is that you're looking for the point isn't to be the same thing all 48 minutes. The point is to win your minutes. That's the point. So you can do that in a variety of different ways. And you probably need to win a championship. You need to have versatility. You cannot win a championship just being the best at the one thing you do. You got to be versatile. And if this is what it takes to push Thibs towards versatility, then no, I'm not going to acquire big. Because my worry is if you go get another big, then he's like, okay, well, I don't need to play. I don't need to even bother with Randle the 5 now. I guess to your point, it would be the argument in favor of Kelly Olynyk would be like he naturally gives you a different look. So if that is the way they view it, okay, fine. But I'm not interested in getting him another rim running big.
Yeah,
I don't want to see that for another. We don't need to see that for 48 minutes a night, every night, no matter the opponent, no matter what. Like sometimes you need to do things that are different. And even Thibs in his heart seems to understand this at various points. Like when he closed the Orlando game, going small with Randle to 5, and guess what? They did close the gap. That did help bring the Knicks very close to it. I mean, they had a chance to win that game. They didn't capitalize on it, but they closed the gap. So he clearly does understand this to some degree. It's about getting him to not just understand it, but also realize when to execute on it. And that's been hard for him, obviously, as a coach throughout his career in New York, especially. But it's something that I think they ultimately need from him if they want to win a championship.
On kind of that note, given that now they've made a big trade for OG, they got him a star point guard. Randle's been playing well. If the Knicks flame out, a first round loss or a second round loss where they don't look competitive, and it seems clear that Thibs, really just didn't push the right buttons. Do you think this is a summer when they might make a move there or part ways?
With Thibs?
Yeah.
I mean, I have to see them move on from him to believe it, because to me they have made moves to make his life easier and.
But if he doesn't capitalize on that, because they can argue this roster is good enough to get to the Eastern Conference Finals, unless they meet Boston in the second round, which right now they probably would. So
I mean, it's good enough that you shouldn't not play competitive series in the second round, right? I think that's like if you lost to Philly, I'm not going to be like, oh my god, like I mean, actually, I guess I should.
Well, they would play Boston in the second round as of now, and I would imagine this is how I expect the standings to shake out.
We'll see how it all shakes out. But my point is more like, there are scenarios where you lose to Philly or lose to Milwaukee, and you're not going to be like, oh my God, Thibs deserves to be fired. But there are scenarios where you could lose to those teams and you do think he should be fired. Like, I thought he should be. I mean, forget being swept. I thought he should have been fired after the Miami series last year. And I had like this extended argument with people on Sunday where it was like, oh, like you won't give Thibs credit. Like, because it was that whole thing. Like, Bonnie writes this whole fucking piece about like, oh, I've said it before and I'll say it again. Thibs deserves a contract extension. One, like, why? What has he done to deserve a contract extension? Like, for the Knicks, I think people need to remember this. After his first year, the Knicks guaranteed his full contract. So he's been rewarded for his coaching performance. Give me a fucking break, okay? Second part is, if you really go back and watch that Miami series and think that there's nothing he could have done, I don't know what the hell you're watching.
They were shorthanded.
I don't care. Okay, Stacy, I don't give a shit if they were shorthanded. Miami was shorthanded. You don't need to devil's advocate this. Miami was shorthanded too. Jimmy Butler was hurt. Like, I don't give a fuck. It's the playoffs. Teams are going to be shorthanded. You have to deal with it. You have to optimize your options. He did not optimize what he had available at any point in that series. he kept trying to fucking make that Hart RJ pairing work, which sucked fucking ass. Okay, that was a terrible fucking lineup. He kept putting it out there. In Game 6, they're up 11 going into the second quarter. He puts out a Deuce, RJ, Hart, Obi, Isaiah Hartenstein lineup, which immediately hemorrhages points and gives it the lead and can't score on offense. They were down, I think, by the time he made a sub, even after taking a timeout, by the way. Like, these are decisions that cost you. And you can be like, well, it was just 3 minutes. Yeah, well, guess what? That should tell you what the fucking margin is of winning high-end playoff series against high-end teams with the best coach in the NBA. That's and people will be like, well, that's Spoelstra. That's what you need to win. You cannot get out-coached by the best guy in the league to that degree and win. And we know this because we've seen better teams lose to Boston. To Miami. Boston lost to Miami last year. They had a better team. They had better talent. And they lost. They've lost to them, what? Two of the last 3 years that they lost to Miami? Whatever, it's 3 of the last 4 when they faced them.
No, it was the bubble year.
Yeah, Miami. They lost in the bubble. They were the favorite that year. They won in 7 in Udoka's 1 year in Boston, the year they made the finals, and they were the heavy favorite in that year too. And they won 7. They lost last year in 7. They were the heavy favorite to start that series. This is the point. You can't just sit there and be like, well, it's Spoelstra. Yeah, it is Spoelstra. Correct. Do you think there were coaches in the fucking 90s and 2000s that was like, well, what can you do? It's just Phil Jackson. Yeah, dude, it's Phil Jackson. You're going to either have to beat the guy or not. And if you can't do it, you can't. And if you make decisions that are suboptimal because you have these preconceived notions of what will win you the game instead of reacting to what the fuck is happening, that's a problem with you as a coach.
Would you have fired Missoula after last year if you were Boston?
Yes. But I think Missoula, at least, look, Missoula came in, a week before the season started because of this Udoka thing. I think 2 or 3 of his assistants left mid-season, which means there was significant brain drain on the roster, or in the coaching staff anyway. It was a weird situation. So I can at least understand having more sympathy for him. I still think he makes some weird-ass decisions in games, and I'm not sure that he's going to take them to the promised land, even with the talent advantage they have. But I think that's a little bit more understandable. This is not year 1 of Thibs. This was year 3. We have seen him make suboptimal rotation decisions because of his own biases towards what a player is or what a player isn't or what he wants to work or what he look, the guy started Alec Burks, Kemba Walker over Emmanuel Quickley, a point guard for the entire season. And now you can say, well, they got Brunson, so that doesn't matter. But that isn't the point. The point is that you made a suboptimal choice for an entire season because why? I've yet to hear a compelling reason. He wanted to win the bench minutes. Give me a fucking break, dude. You want to win the bench minutes? And guess what? You can win a lot.
3-17 for a stretch that year.
And also that, if you want to argue that, fine, I'll give you that. Here's the issue with that. Winning the bench minutes can win you a lot of regular season games. That is not winning you dick in the playoffs because teams extend their starters a lot of minutes. And now all of a sudden your bench, which had an advantage over other teams, reserve or heavier lineups, doesn't have the same advantage. And you need to put your best players on the floor as often as possible. I don't want to say as often because that means, just jack up the minutes, right, in the regular season. It's not what I'm saying. But when you have 7 or 8 guys, the priority should be figuring out, okay, what are the best groupings of these 7 or 8 guys? And how do I experiment with that so that when it comes to the playoffs, I understand what works, I understand what doesn't work, and I have options to go to against different lineups, against different opponents. And when you just decide, no, this bench unit is so good, I never want to break them up, you're cutting off your nose to spite your face. And I don't know. I just have a problem with a lot of his choices. Now, that doesn't mean don't extend him. It means don't extend him right now, which was my point. That's all I said. I said, don't extend him right now. Wait till after the season and make an evaluation. There are things he does very well. There are things I like about Thibs. There are things I don't like about Thibs very often. And to me, the things I don't like about him are things that I believe will get exposed once again in the playoffs. And if those things are exposed again in the playoffs against any opponent, right? The point of that, I'm not judging him necessarily on wins and losses. I'm judging you on, are your decisions optimal towards what the data says and what we've seen to winning games? And if for example, he wants to experiment with this Hart OG thing. I don't love it. But if he wants to experiment with it, cool. Let's say we get 500 minutes the rest of the way, and that those two together at the 2 and 3, they just kick ass. Guess what? Even if I don't particularly like it, I think it. Then I would be like, okay, like that lineup works for whatever reason. The things they do work. So go with God and roll with that lineup if need be. But like, don't work like that makes sense because if it works, it works. If you choose there's been let's say they try let's say he's like, I like this Grimes at the 2 and Hart at the 3 and OG at the 4 lineup, right? That's something that I think we all kind of want to see. Let's say over 600, 700 minute sample, that doesn't work. Okay, then so be it. Then that's something that you have to adjust. Okay, maybe you tweak something. Okay, maybe Hart comes out, you put DiVincenzo in. Maybe you take Grimes out, DiVincenzo comes in. Whatever the tweaks are, you have to work on those things. You have to experiment with different lineups and groups and all these things. And I don't think he doesn't like experimenting because the cost of experimentation can cost you margins, right? And if he doesn't believe in the experiment to begin with, then why would he do it? That's how he views it. And I understand that to some extent. The problem is when you don't bother to experiment, when you need to have pivots in the playoffs, like you mentioned, the Knicks were shorthanded, but they hadn't tried a lot of shit, so he was reticent to try things, right? Like Randle at the 5 in that Miami lineup should have been 100% an option. And he didn't go to it. If you remember, he didn't actually go to it until the very end of game 6. And guess what? That lineup nearly fucking brought the Knicks back. And honestly, they had a chance to win the game, right? They had the ball down 2 with however much time was left in the game. Like that is the point, is when you need these things, you want to know that you want to have some confidence in what you're attempting, not going blind. And to bring it back to Thibs and all that stuff, like I'm not saying there's also a scenario where he comes out of any series, like let's say they lose in the second round to Boston and it's 5, let's say they lose in 5 games. But you watch the series, it's like the Darvin Ham thing last year, right? Yeah, the Lakers lost to the Nuggets, but if you watch that series, you were probably like, okay, like they were pretty close in all these games. Like you feel pretty good about the coach bringing him back, given I know he struggled this year. But the point is, you'd be like, okay, this was not like some destruction, like they didn't get absolutely outclassed, like they competed, they just lost in the margins each game, which maybe that was coaching, but also maybe it's just talent. The Knicks are losing on the margins every game against a team like Boston. I don't think you fire Thibs, and if you extend him, even if I don't necessarily agree with it, I can understand it. Like I thought Thibs should have been fired after the Miami series. I didn't expect him to be, and I didn't think it was an irrational decision for them to bring him back. I do think if you see similar kind of like drawbacks or if you see similar illogical decision making in terms of the options he picks when better options are available, then I think bringing him back after the season would be unacceptable. But if you see improvement in that, even if I'd still have reservations about how he'd perform over the long haul, I think it'd be very reasonable to extend him. I'm not going to say I'd be gung ho about it, but I think you'd at least have to give the front office the benefit of the doubt then.
And I think also what's different about this year from last year is, like I said, this is the year now. They need to be making moves to show that. I mean, when I say moves, I mean this team has the talent now, I think, to establish itself as a top team in the East. I think to your point, the other thing I'll add is it's not just the fact that Boston has so much talent that makes it terrifying. It is that they have all these pivots. Part of that is good roster construction, but they can play KP at the 5. They can play him at the 4. Horford knows his role. They can, increase and decrease his minutes as necessary, right? They can go with Tatum at the 4. I mean, does Thibs even play Tatum at the 4 if he was coaching that team, right? But I think that the point is also, I think everybody's kind of on watch now, where this is it. Like, you have the team, go win in the playoffs. I think if Thibs really leaves them losing in the margins against the team that they're, again, I think put them up against, they don't have Giannis, but put them up against Philly or Milwaukee. I genuinely don't think that upper echelon talent difference with how Brunson is playing is as pronounced. I think for that matter, Randle is on watch too. He's been playing fantastic. I love the energy he's had since the OG trade. Love how he's kind of focused on going interior. He's also just a lot less hesitant, it feels like. But if he drops another stinker in the playoffs, it's probably tough. It's time to make maybe a tough choice there too, right? But they're no longer, I think, in a situation where it's okay, we're taking incremental steps. You have to take the next incremental step this year. If that means losing the second round in a tough series where Giannis went off, or you ran into Boston, or given Embiid's playoff failures, I think they should be able to beat them. And Tyrese Maxey hasn't necessarily killed it in the playoffs either. And like to your point, I think it's definitely a case where I agree you have to value the process over results. But I think we're no longer in a situation where they're like, oh well, we still won a series against Cleveland. That was amazing. Everyone's on watch. Everyone, I mean, besides maybe Brunson, he's probably a little bit beyond that now. But if he really shits the bed in the playoffs, that probably, you might not get rid of Brunson, but you probably do feel at that point like, now we need to make a superstar trade now. If OG is just off in the playoffs or doesn't show you that, maybe that impacts what you're willing to offer him, right? I don't think they let him go, but it puts you in a little bit of a tough situation. The point is, like, the time is now. It is not the future anymore. And that's not just because they traded quickly. It's just there are just no excuse. There's very few excuses right now. You cannot point to the roster construction. You can't point to, Randle. I don't think, if he's healthy in the playoffs, knock on wood, hopefully it will be. You won't be able to point to, well, you maybe play with Alfred Payton, or, this was just my second playoff series. It's your third playoff series now. I think they're all kind of fourth. Yeah. So they're all kind of, the expectations are high now. There's no getting around that.
Yeah, and I think, like, I feel the same way about Thibs that I do with Randle. Like, I'm not really worried about them anymore as regular season coaches. Like, yes, are there things that Randle does that infuriate me during the regular season? Yes. Are there things that Thibs does that infuriate me during the regular season? Yes. But I think on aggregate, we have enough data at this point to say that, like, okay, they're net positives in the regular season that help you establish yourself as a playoff level team. That's safe to say. Aside from that disaster 2021-22 season, and honestly that disaster start to the 2019-20 season, which wasn't just on Randle, that was the entire team. We've seen these guys prove themselves at that level, so I'm not worried about that for either Randle or Thibs. But, like, we need to see it in the playoffs, and to me the goal for both those guys is the same as it was coming into the season. Like, I've been really, really encouraged by what I've seen from Julius this year. I think he seems to be in a better headspace for sure. Even if he was in a better headspace compared to the 2021-22 season last season, he seems to be in a better place right now. I think this trade has almost even helped him.
When's the last time he got a tech?
I don't know. It's been a while, and even since the OG trade, you can almost see, like, he seems to be in an even better place. And that's good to see. I like the way his game has evolved. I think this version of him is probably the most likely to have success in the playoffs, but we have to see that. And if we don't see it, if he flounders again, then I think it's probably time to move on from him. And that just is the same thing with Thibs. Like, to me, they're the two guys. Like, honestly, if Quickly was here still, I'd probably say the same thing about him too. Like, yeah, we know what you can do in the regular season, but if you don't do it in the playoffs, again, for a third time, your fourth series, like, there's some serious questions that need to be asked about your future with the Knicks. And honestly, I wonder if that was part of their reasoning for moving on, because they're like, well, if he does suck in the playoffs again, we kind of have to pay him anyway, because what the fuck else are we going to do? And that doesn't seem great to us. And, like, we can, like, I think that was a reason I think they didn't extend him over the offseason. I think that was also a factor in probably making this deal, because they're like, well, we're kind of in a shitty spot here where if he doesn't play well in the playoffs, we need to pay him anyway. And if he does play well in the playoffs, we probably got to pay him more, which sucks. So, again, we're in a shitty spot. So I think that probably played a factor in their choice. But it should also play a factor in their choice with regard to Thibs and with Randle, because, again, like, I don't think either of us is questioning, like, are they objectively good at their jobs? Like, yes, they are objectively good at their jobs. Thibs is not a bad coach. He might be like a top 10 coach, to be honest. But, like, I don't know that it's just a top 10 guy that wins you a championship. I think you need to be in the upper echelon. And I don't think, I genuinely mean this, like, I don't think this team yet without some additional star power maybe added to it or an upgrade or however you want to phrase it, I don't think they're really a championship contender yet this year. So I don't think it needs to be like a got to get to the Eastern Conference Finals or that's it. I'm not judging him on that. I think there is a way to judge his decisions about are you optimizing what's available to you, and then you let the chips fall where they may, right? If you're doing that, then I'm not going to, I can't kill you for what the results are. But if you're making choices that aren't logical based on data or logic, quite honestly, or how a team is defending you, like, right, that was the case with the Hart RJ thing where you're just like, dude, they're not defending these guys outside the arc and they can't make them pay. And you're making life impossible for Brunson and Randle to a degree. Like, what the fuck? And if that is something that kind of plays out again, right, where if it's like teams are playing off of Hart and OG and they can't buy a three, that's something to consider. So that's more or less what it is. And like, again, with Randle, it's like, okay, we know what you can do in the regular season. Can you bring this same level of focus and especially the defensive energy, like you mentioned, that we've seen lately? Can we see that in the playoffs? Can we, when you make a mistake, can you not hang your head and not get back on defense? Yeah, and pout. Like, making a mistake happens to everybody. Everybody makes mistakes. You know, it's the reaction that counts. And his reactions to his own misgivings and failures in the playoffs have been piss poor at times. It was really bad last year in that Miami series. Like, honestly, disgraceful at various points. And that's
he was injured. You had all the things, but that's kind of the point. Yeah. I think that those excuses are gone.
And that excuse, the injury excuse, was never the issue. If he's like you raised the Philly game, I actually said on the post game after that, I was kind of happy to see him in that game because he didn't play well. He shot like shit. He made mistakes on offense, but his effort was there. Like, he got back on defense. He made plays when he turned the ball over.
He didn't spiral when he screwed up, right?
I think he did spiral offensively, but he didn't let that take away from how he competed defensively, how he competed on the glass, all that stuff. And that's the stuff where, like, if you give me that, like, there's a reason why you want to like, a lot of people might not know this, go check out the 1994 final stats and go check out what Patrick Ewing shot from the field. And there's a reason why he could shoot the way he did from the field in that series. And Knicks fans will still be like, for the most part, be like,
he was also playing the greatest defensive player of all time, probably.
Yeah, so, but the point is, like, but the point being is, you can shoot like shit and fans can still be appreciative of your effort and not kill you for it and still feel,
and you can impact the game and push again 7 games, right? So
and still feel good about this player moving forward and what you can achieve with them. And like it's kind of the same concept as the Thibs thing, where it's like, if you see that Julius's offensive decision making is in the right place, he's trying to make the right plays, maybe his execution fails, fine. What you don't want to see then is that spiral and negatively influence his effort getting back in transition, his rebounding, rotations on defense. And that, to me, was the most encouraging part of that Philly game, where it didn't. I thought he was really good in those areas, and like, not perfect, but he was really good. You lived with the effort he was giving you there. And he had some really nice possessions on Embiid. He had some nice possessions in transition. I think he stripped Tobias on one after his own turnover and stopped them from getting an easy bucket. So like, you saw the things that you're talking about, and that can really, really move the needle, again, move the baseline, whatever you want to say, in ways that materially impact the outcome of the game, even if you are shooting like shit.
Yeah, and again, I think that you can always talk about the mitigating factors. It was one series last year, right? And to his credit, I thought Julius had a good game one against Cleveland. I do think Thibs outcoached Bickerstaff, in that series as well, shifting to more of the guard screens. And I will say, like, at least on the Hart RJ thing, I do think there was something up with Grimes' health. Yes, it's very shady that he went from that to like playing 40 minutes or whatever, or almost all. He played all 48 one of the games, right, Grimes?
Yes. Game 5.
5, yeah. So it is a little bit like, but I'm willing to even say that, if his shoulder was screwed up, maybe he didn't want to. It was even just putting him on Jimmy. I thought he was legitimately better on Jimmy than Hart was. So there's mitigating factors. It's one series, but it can't happen again. And the stakes are high now. I think, like it or not. I I think I'm higher on this team maybe than you are. I don't think they need a superior player to Brunson. I don't think they need maybe even another star. A star is a more efficient way because, if you did get, someone like they're not going to get him, but like a Devin Booker, right? That probably plugs a bunch of those gaps for you. And it gives you not just a third creator, but like a really, really like great third creator. But listen, Brunson has proven to be pretty matchup agnostic. Like, you're not shutting down Jalen Brunson in the playoffs. He faced the best coach in the NBA with a loaded defensive roster. They couldn't stop him. Randle has the ability, I think, to be pretty damn good as a second option. OG can't create, but I don't. A lot of these teams. I mean, look around the league. Who is Philly's third creator? Tobias Harris, DeAnthony Melton. Who is Boston's? I mean, Boston has Jaylen Brown. That's better than what the Knicks have. He's their second creator. Porzingis isn't really a shot creator. Who's their third creator?
Derek White.
Derek. Okay, so the Knicks don't have it, but that's the point. It's not like the third creator is a star. And I think Brunson is good enough to be your top creator. I think what Boston really scares me about them is not the fact that they have Drew. It's just how many different games they can play on both ends. And, that's, again, the Knicks have some ability to do that. I mean, who's Denver's third creator? Who was it last year? Aaron Gordon? I get Bruce Brown. So, on that kind of thing, I really don't think it. I mean, we haven't seen them do it in the playoffs. Maybe if Randle struggles again, then you have to say they're not a contender, of course. But they have the talent. And I think, yes, they have the top end talent for that too.
Wait, you think the Knicks have the top end talent to compete against Boston?
I think to be considered a contender, yes. I think Brunson right now is a top 10 player in the NBA. And he's good enough, especially if you're looking at just what do we get stars for? Offensive creation in the playoffs. He's proven that.
Isn't a lot of this just contingent? Look, I think this is.
And like I said, for Boston, it's also just a weird matchup. It's not that Tatum is that much better than Brunson to me. It is the fact that you have to deal with a stretch five and really good perimeter defenders. It is that team construction more than just the gap in top end talent to me.
I think you're right, but it's all contingent on Randle showing up in the playoffs. Like all the stuff about Thibs, I stand by. But if Randle doesn't show up, then he just inherently has like a built-in, not an excuse. That's probably the wrong way to put it. But it's like, even if he coaches perfectly, you're not winning a championship. Like, I still think they could have won the Miami series even with Randle, playing way below what you would hope. And I think at bare minimum it should have gone 7. But like, I think the difference.
If you get that version of Randle, no, they don't have the top end talent.
Yeah.
Again, he is a 2-time All NBA player, probably headed for 3. You have like those two guys, and one is playoff proven. You get even 85% of that from Randle in the playoffs. I'm not going to be sitting there saying we need another superstar. One, I think that if you sacrifice some of the flexibility, I think Boston's the best example. Tatum is a great player. Porzingis is playing at close to an All NBA level, but it is more just how versatile they are, how much they can do. That scares me more than. And then if the fact is you run into Nikola Jokic or Giannis and they just average 45 points a game, even in that case, I'm not going to say, oh, they need a third star. I could say, well, maybe they need a guy that's good. Fine. Right? Then that's just you're back to square one. But Boston's a contender, and frankly, no, Tatum is not as good as Jokic. He's not as good as Giannis. They just have that kind of balanced roster. And I think on that conversation, Brunson's there. I'm not even trying to relitigate anything that's been said. I just think look at the numbers. If you're talking about, let's focus on the Knicks. Forget about the outside chatter. You have a guy that averaged 30 for an entire playoffs. You have a guy who's getting 26 and 7 on close to 60 true shooting, and now the playmaking has really improved as well. You have another guy who is a double machine, who showed, for a big solid passing skills. It's obviously not, optimal for how often maybe he handles the ball. And when engaged, can engage on defense. So if the Knicks lose, I do agree it'll probably be because of Randle. And then it's more of a situation where, okay, we need a different number 2 guy. Or maybe Brunson has to be the number 2 guy if you can get a Devin Booker. But this is not, I don't think it's a scenario where I'm like looking at these teams and I'm like, oh yeah, they got way more talent than us. We don't have a dude or something like that. No, I think they have that top end talent. It's just showing up in the playoffs and being willing to make the kind of decisions that maximize it. And if you run into Boston, like I said, I'll repeat it again. I don't think the gap to Boston is necessarily top end talent. I think it is an overall roster construction and absolutely specifically one particular player who is very unique. There's a reason they call him a unicorn, who causes a bunch of matchup problems that exacerbate, the greatness of Tatum. And by the way, is Steph Curry good enough is he good enough right now to be the top offensive option on a championship team?
I think last year was his final year of that. I know that all the metrics still love him. And I love Steph, but from what I've seen of him this year, I don't know, something's off there. Like all the metrics still have him as like a top 10 guy. But when I've watched him this year, it just feels like it's not the same. And I mean, look, maybe some of this is just me being subjective and only watching, catching the end of their games, and they've struggled a lot at the end of their games. But I think the level to which they've struggled does say something about him. It feels like he can't get the same separation off the dribble that he did even last season. I don't know.
I think losing Draymond did hurt.
But even when they had Draymond, it's not like they were killing it. So
no,
I don't know.
It takes off some of that ball handling pressure. The point I'm making is the Knicks have a player right now who's playing better than Steph Curry. To me, that makes them that removes the top end talent, especially if you're getting this from Julius question out. Now, if they don't get this from Julius in the playoffs, to your point, yeah, you're back at square one. But right now, yeah, I think that the reasons I expect them to lose have more to do with just cleaning out some of those, filling out some of those gaps on the edges of the roster and Thibs maximizing it. And if they do those things, I think they can beat anybody, save maybe Boston or Jokic. I like them in a series against the Clippers. I'll say that too.
You like the Knicks in a series against the Clippers?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think Clippers have been really good. I know they lost last night, but they've been really. It's just so early in the season, and I honestly, the West is its own thing. Like, you kind of have to build your teams most of the time. This is unless there's some obvious like, oh, Golden State is the best team in the league. Oh, it's the fucking 90s. The Bulls are the best. Like, unless it's that situation, or the Lakers in the 2000s, right, with the Kobe and Shaq stuff. You kind of have to build your teams in the sense of how do we match up in conference, and like the West is its own thing. I can't even. I don't even care about how the Knicks match up with teams out there right now. But in the East, like, I think Boston right now is a standard, and I'm sure if there are Heat fans listening to this, they're going to be like, what are you talking about? Look, it's great that you guys have Spoelstra and Bam. I just don't know how I don't know how you can build a team to beat a coach. Like, wow, I just don't
have faith in Tyler Hero.
No. But like, I don't know
really well. We should say that we've shit on him a lot. He's putting up legitimate star-level numbers. So
it's too bad he's still a shitter. But like, I don't know how you can't build a team to beat a coach. It's a credit to Spoelstra that I'm not kind of holding him or holding the Knicks to like, how do we beat Miami? But like, I think in terms of talent, Boston is the standard right now in the conference. I know that Milwaukee has Giannis and Dame. I think their supporting cast sucks. I actually think if the Knicks do get Brogdon, I would bet they're the underdog in a series against the Bucks. And if this is so annoying. I think every time we talk about the playoffs now, just understand there's an underlying caveat of
Randle.
This is all predicated on Randle being present. But like, I think they'd be the underdog in that series, and I think they are a better team.
And they probably have a coaching advantage in that series. I think there's, Griffin has been dealt not the best hand. And again, like, and I'll say this, Boston scares me, not because they have like a guy like Giannis. Like, I think Tatum is underrated. They're in some ways, but he's a top 5 to 10 player. He is not a generational MVP level player right now. That is not why they scare me. They scare me because of just the distribution and, again, the versatility. So if they lose to Boston, my conclusion won't be they need another star to be a contender. My conclusion, especially if Randle, there's a possibility that Randle shows up and Brunson shows up. OG does a good job on Tatum, and Boston still wins because they they can win on these margins, and maybe Thibs coaches a good series. Maybe that all of that holds true, and Boston's just that good. My takeaway from that won't be that, oh, we need to go trade the farm for Donovan Mitchell, or we need to trade the farm. I mean, if you get a guy like Booker, fine, it's worth it. But that wouldn't be my takeaway at that point. So if that's the gap between them and being a contender because they can't beat that team, I think maybe you try to get a stretch five, maybe you try to continue to build out your versatility on your roster. Or maybe it is get a third star if that's the easiest option, but I don't think that'll be the only option. That's not how I see it. The only option for them to surmount Boston. And beyond that, I like them in pretty much any series, especially if they get a guy like Brogdon.
Yeah. But like I feel pretty confident in the assessment that right now I think Boston is in a tier above everybody else in the conference. And if that's where the Knicks are, given kind of like one where this front office took over from, and then two, the assets they have at their disposal, that's a pretty good place to be. They're the one team in the conference really that has a full cachet of assets and has flexibility to add. I guess the one team at the top of the conference, towards the top of the conference, that has their full cachet of assets and the flexibility to make moves. It's like them and Orlando, basically.
Indiana has some assets too, right?
Indiana has their own picks moving forward, which gives them value. But like,
I am fascinated to see what Orlando does, though. That's going to be very interesting.
I'll put it this way: like, people have talked about forever, like, well, it's New York, you should have an advantage. Like, the Knicks didn't have an advantage for a long time in either trading for players or signing players, or whatever, because they were a joke. They're not a joke anymore. They're good. So like, when it comes, like, yeah, let's just say they're equal. I mean, they're not. They have more, but like, let's say they're equal to Orlando or Indiana in terms of trade assets. This is where the allure or the draw of the market should give you a perceived advantage. So like, if I don't know how exactly this works. My assumption is guys like Brogdon and stuff like that have some say with front offices where it's like, hey, look, like, if the offers are relatively equal, if you could send me to this market over there, I'd prefer that. And I think teams generally tend to honor that stuff. And like, I would like to believe that if the Knicks and the Magic both made equalish offers for Malcolm Brogdon, the Knicks would trump that. Like, they'd be able to trump that based on their market, and maybe just in the fact like, hey, okay, fine, we'll throw you an extra second round pick. Like that, if that's what's going to get it done, that's what's going to get it done. But they're at a point where like, and I think they showed this in this deal for OG, because if you really just think about it in terms of pure value, like asset value, I think you can argue that they overpaid to get him, right? Given that they gave up the Detroit second or whatever, but like, they gave it up. They didn't hoard that. They weren't like, no, that's a deal breaker, because actually, like, according to our spreadsheet here, this means we're giving you 112 points of capital and we're only getting 103 back or something. Like, they actually just made the deal. They are at a point where paying slight premiums to get the guys you want, get the pieces you need, probably makes some sense. So in that vein, like, they should have more upward mobility, at least in terms of trades, than teams like Indiana and teams like Orlando.
Yeah, and I think there's something to mention. A team like Orlando, right? They have a lot of assets, right? But the Knicks have been in this position too. It's like, there's some assets you don't want to part with. What are you willing to trade, right? So Franz Wagner is one of the top trade assets in the league. They're not trading him. They're not trading Paolo. They're probably not trading Jalen Suggs. So that it changes things a little bit, right? Whereas the Knicks, for the right move, probably would be willing to trade Grimes. And I'm saying he's as good as those three, but if Grimes is probably on par with some of Orlando's best assets, right? The best tradable assets, right? I think that they're in a good spot. I think they should probably just get the Brogdon trade done. The injury history with Brogdon and OG being on the same team probably gets a little bit worrisome at that point, because neither's been a paragon of health for their career. But they now have the ability to make those moves on the margins. And yeah, like, I think Boston is a tier above, but I don't think it's necessarily as simple as the top end talent gap, I guess, would be my point. So it'll be really fascinating to see what the Knicks do. They got Dallas next. I think that'll be a really good test for how this defense matches up with OG. They've been blowing teams out of the water. I do think that with any new team after a trade, there's also other teams are going to have to adjust, right? So part of the reason they might be blowing teams out, it's worth noting, is that teams just haven't seen this look from the Knicks, right? And that is something eventually teams are going to adjust, right? So you talk about that Hart OG lineup. Our team's going to start playing OG a little bit differently, right? Are they going to maybe force the ball into Hart's hands more? Are they going to maybe crash the glass a little bit more? Or are they going to maybe, if the Knicks are rebounding so well, are they going to improve in transition, right? The Knicks have been able to play with more pace because the scouting report of the Knicks had been hammer them on the glass. Now you can't do, or try to, you have some openings in offensive rebounds. I don't want to say hammer them, but the Knicks have been a poor defensive rebounding team for a few weeks before they got OG. So the teams are going to adjust. But I think the talent level is there. I actually wanted to ask you this as well, because I forgot who this was who brought it up in the Strickland, but someone said OG, was it James who said this? Oh, yeah, it was James, I think.
James made an actual competent point.
Well, that's what I'm going to ask. He compared the acquisition of OG to the Debusschere move. Other moves in history, in recent Knicks history that have kind of taken them to the top. And again, this is one that Starks and Quickly, some people have compared them. They traded Starks for Latrell Sprewell, right? I'm not old enough to remember the fan reaction, but I would imagine that you're trading a fan favorite for a player who's, obviously OG doesn't have this kind of an issue. Who's he punched his coach, right? So I guess my question is, how would you put this in comparison to some of the other big moves? Is OG the Knicks Debusschere? I'll start there.
That might be a little extreme so far.
Let's not
I don't know if we
each other's dicks quite yet.
Yes, let's not. Honestly, I think this trade it kind of reminds me of, not exactly the same, but it does remind me a little bit of the Halliburton trade that the Pacers made. The Knicks did trade a pick in this deal, but in that trade there was no draft capital exchanged. This one didn't have much draft capital exchanged. They, I think both teams benefited from that trade, depending on, I know that there will be people that have and continue to be critical of the Kings for trading Halliburton, but I think they had to do it for a variety of reasons. But I would be hypocritical. It would be hypocritical of me if I were to criticize and kill the Knicks for making this trade because I think Emmanuel Quickley has the highest ceiling in the deal, while when I've also defended the Kings for making the trade, even though I think Halliburton has the highest ceiling in the deal. And it's probably, he's already the best player in the deal by far. Sometimes you have to make moves that hurt because you're not going to get the best out of the individual pieces as a collective group. And I agree. And I will always believe that there is a world where it is possible that Brunson and Quickly can play together and you can have that be your backcourt on a contending team. I do believe that. I believe that there's a chance that that's true. I don't actually disagree with the idea that it is probably unlikely that backcourt works as a contending group. But my issue was mostly just that they never tried. The Kings actually did try with Halliburton and Fox. They played a shit ton of minutes together. They had no defensive backbone, and you weren't getting the best out of either of them at that point. So I think they at least found out. The Knicks never found out. They didn't try. And that's the part that's frustrating. But leaving that aside, it would be stupid of me to be like, oh, well, I have to kill the Knicks for this because Quickly I think he's the best asset in the deal. But but were you going to get the maximum value for him? If I had to hypothesize, I don't think it would have worked. So ultimately, I think they had to make this move one day, sooner or later. And because of his contractual situation and the untenable kind of spot they found themselves with his minutes load this year, I think that day came sooner.
And it's also, teams are going to value him differently, right? A team with let's say they wanted to trade him to Portland, right? They have a point guard in Simons, right? they might not have wanted to do that fit, right? So they happen to be trading with a team that needs a point guard and can give him a lot of minutes, has the flexibility to sign him, and happens to have a piece that really helps the Knicks, right? So it was a very fortuitous situation. I think people rightly point out, you talk about getting the right value. There are other teams where we might, like Orlando has a lot of assets and they could use quickly, but they would say, we're pretty loaded at guard. We're going to have our own minutes crunch, right? It seemed like Atlanta, right? If they traded him for Murray, Atlanta might say, well, we have a 6-foot point guard too. Maybe they would have been more willing to lean into it. Atlanta's a data-driven team, so maybe they're more willing to lean into the idea that Quickly's defense really does give you the ability to play that. But they found kind of a perfect fit. Going back to the Debusschere thing, though, I think what's interesting and why I kind of like this comp is Debusschere allowed them to play Reed at the 5, right? And the Knicks haven't gone to this, but I've said this a lot. If this, like to your point, right, this is how you can turn the tide on a team like Boston. If you have these things in your back pocket, if you have a bunch of different ways to win, that has been Spoelstra's calling card. And it doesn't have to be schematic adjustments. It doesn't have to be, trap or whatever. Like I actually on defensive adjustments, I trust I trust Thibs. But if OG unlocks Randle at the 5, even for a few minutes of a game, but it's a consistent thing you can go to. I think if KP plays the 5, they should be able to play Randle there. Where that really comes down to is not the fact that Randle's undersized, is he willing to chase KP around screens? But from a physical standpoint, they are capable of doing that. And if he unlocks that, that's where it's really a move that goes beyond, people are talking about, always only taking 8 shots a game. That's really where he allows you to have so much flexibility. And in that sense, I do kind of, and of course he adds, the kind of defensive mentality. He allows them to embrace that physical mentality that Thibs wants. That's why I thought that was an interesting comp.
Yeah, I just I think the Knicks still needed, like, Debusschere was actually the finishing piece, right? Like that,
Yeah.
they baby that, and I guess they needed another one later down the line. They went to get Monroe before the 73 season, and they signed Jerry Lucas, so like it's not like they got nobody. But it's an interesting parallel. It would be kind of gross if I was like, if Brogdon ended up being the finishing piece. Like, actually, we win the championship this year after we like trade for Brogdon. He was the rightful 6th man of the year all along. How did we never know? But like, it's again, like, I am critical of certain pieces of how they managed Quickly and then how that tied into the deal. But the deal's been good for them, and I think it's probably going to be great. Like, they just need to find the right things. Like, the way I view it is this: I think if Randle is legit, I still think feels like you still need another, I don't want to say a star, but you need another third guy that can genuinely create in a playoff situation in that lineup. Like, DiVincenzo's fine for now. He's really good. I like to balance that group. But I think you ideally would want somebody better than him and move him back to the bench.
You're not running pick and roll with him in the playoffs. You're not having him, he's
it puts too much on Brunson and Randle, right? Like, I don't think you can just get through the entire playoffs, win a championship with those two guys, the only dudes that you can toss the ball to and they can create a shot for you.
And by the way, Milwaukee has that problem too, right? Yes. I think that they're a little bit in the same situation where they only have 2 creators. So I definitely agree they could use, maybe that guy is DeJounte Murray. I have concerns about the fit. Maybe it's Brogdon. Is Brogdon kind of the floor of that in your eyes? Maybe like the worst possible guy who maybe is enough to be that third creator?
I think Brogdon, the reason I want Brogdon is, one, I like his contract for future trade purposes. And then the other part is, like, I think he might give you a clear idea of what you need, because I don't know that the third guy you get has to be a star. I don't know the third guy you get needs to be a starter. I don't know the third guy you get needs to be like a big, like a big time name. Like, it could just be a Brogdon, or it could be like, is there a version of Brogdon that you can get down the line that accepts coming off the bench with the understanding of, like, I will close playoff? Like, can you find an Iguodala is the idea, right? Like, Iguodala is I
want Iguodala.
Yeah. But like, Iguodala is the idea of, like, a guy who probably, every metric would have said start him over Harrison Barnes. But I feel like there was a value to them not doing that. Like there was a value to simply bring him off the bench and then closing with that group instead, right? The death lineup or whatever. If you can find that guy, if you can find it,
wasn't that much of a creator, right? At that point in his career.
No, but he was a good creator off of
their
like
actions.
Yeah, and he was a good connector. And like, can you find a guy like that? I don't know. Like honestly, I watch Cade sometimes and I'm like, he could be that guy. Like he doesn't he's not Iguodala defensively. They're very, very different players. And even offensively, they're different players. But like, I think the best version of Cade is not the guy that's averaging 30 a game and having everything run through him with Detroit. I think it's a guy who plays next to more gifted creators, scorers, however you want to put it, and can just kind of fill in the gaps. So, this lineup needs more playmaking. I can do that. This lineup needs me to space off the floor. I can do that. This lineup needs me to be like a connector. I can do that. And that's kind of he's a player I'd be really, really interested in if Troy Weaver's stupid enough to trade him. And what that would cost, because I do think him, OG, Brunson, Randle, Hartenstein, that's a lineup that I'm like, I would be very intrigued by the ceiling of. Like, what can that be? And that lineup is 100% a group that should have two-way balance. And because of Cade's size, like now you're increasing the I guess you're decreasing the excuses better for Thibs' reasoning to not use Randle at the 5, right? Like you've got now two jumbo wings with Cade and OG. Like that's something I would really consider. He's somebody I really, really like, but obviously I don't know that he's available. But that's just to give you an example of like maybe the type of piece that exists that isn't quite a perennial all-star type, but maybe you don't need that. Maybe you don't need that to be a contending team. Like, assuming, again, Randle shows up in the playoffs, because I feel pretty good about Brunson, regardless of what his shortcomings in a variety of ways can be. Like, that dude, I trust in the playoffs and has proven it now for 2 years in a row in the playoffs, so I don't have a problem with that. So, like, if you get that and you get a Randle that functions in the playoffs, I don't know that you need another superstar, especially if your depth is good. And the Knicks, they have this window where
Brogdon's enough at that point. That's
yeah. I guess I don't know. I don't totally feel great about that, but maybe. But like, I do think that like they have this window where they can potentially bring in a major talent and still have the ability to retain the depth right now that exists. And like, if you can thread that needle, you probably don't need this true top end superstar third guy. So that's like why I think it's really important for the Knicks to get somebody legit in the next. Hopefully, honestly, the ideal thing would be before, like maybe after the season, but before the next league year starts when the new CBA fully kicks in. But like I think it needs to happen within the next 12 months. After that, it'll be very, very hard for them once, potential new contracts for Brunson and or Randle kick in.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this does hinge to your point on Randle being really good. I think they could get a worse player than Cade, but I also don't know. I mean, Cade would probably cost you a bunch, right? I don't know why Detroit would be looking to trade him at this point.
Sorry, say that again?
I mean, I don't imagine Cade is available, and I don't think Detroit would really be willing to trade him at this point, right? I mean, I know everyone's talking about it, but one, they seem to still think that they can win now with a guy like Siakam, but if they were going to trade someone, if they're going to trade Ivy or something, that's one thing, but Cade's been good. Like, he is the kind of guy that you need to get him help, but like, he is the kind of guy you build around if you're Detroit, especially, right? Why would he be available? And if he is, it's probably going to cost you $3.
I mean, I know this generally is not logic I like to apply, but like, wouldn't the argument just be like, because Troy Weaver's a fucking idiot? That would be the argument. Yeah, I mean, yeah. I agree with you. I think it's very unlikely. By the way, did you know that Cade Cunningham's nickname is Motorcade? This is according to Basketball Reference. But look, Cade's playing a lot better now.
Why wasn't that Cade McNamara's name?
God, he's such a loser, man. How hard do you think he's rooting for Washington tonight?
He was rooting for Iowa. Yeah, he probably is rooting for Washington.
He wouldn't call JJ by his name. The other guy.
It's fun fact. He's matched up with Michael Penix Jr. more. I don't think he played in that Indiana game, but when Michael Penix Jr. the last time Indiana beat Michigan, doesn't happen often. It's because Penix went off. So,
by the way, Cade this year, he's averaging right now 23, 7, and 4 on 45, 33 and a half, 87 splits. Like he's really close to popping off.
Like he's legitimate. I think he's ideally a number 2 option. Like he's ideally like, I don't want to say the Middleton role because I think he's a superior playmaker and he's the kind of guy you want the ball in his hands. But he's a good player. There's no like people. If you're going to hold Detroit struggles on him, they're a shit show. I would ask, if the Knicks for whatever reason don't go for a guy like Brogdon, would you? I know you don't have interest in Jaden Ivey. He's a guy I could see them taking a flyer on, though, if he's at a real discount, just because the upside is very tantalizing. The last time they tried to say they got a physically talented player who had underachieved in Cam Reddish, the thought was maybe Thibs could bring out some of that defense. We've seen for everything else, Reddish is struggling to shoot the ball. I think Lakers fans have now kind of become frustrated. The defense has been good. Is Ivey, we can fix him? Is that kind of someone that intrigues you? Maybe not even necessarily to get them to contention this year or to play a big role this year, but maybe down the line can be that third creator next to Brunson and Randle.
You think Cade can be? Is that what you said?
I definitely think Cade can, but I'm saying I know Ivey.
You think Ivey? Ivey. I just don't think the Knicks are going to do it because they've moved. They're not in the flyer stage. Like, it's why I kind of didn't like. I actually got why the Clippers did the Bones deal because like they just needed talent somehow anyway. But like now that they have Harden, you're kind of seeing like they're like, yeah, great, thanks, buddy, we're good. You sit on the bench.
So another guy the Knicks should probably target.
Okay. No, they're not in that phase anymore. They're just not. Like, they're just not going to be interested in getting guys that need time and reps to like work out their kinks and work out what it is and what they're not. Like this is it's like the RJ thing. Like they had outgrown the ability to endure growing pains. Like this is why Quickly was like such a weird thing for them because he was growing, but he was still good while he was growing. Like he was still positively influencing things. So I think it's why they probably kept him for as long as they did because they were like, well, he's really good. So fuck, what do we do? Like RJ was different, right? He was clearly still working stuff out. Whether he achieves, whether he does figure those things out or not, they could not endure that any longer. And I don't think they will. Like you can even see this with Thibs' rotations, right? Like Deuce needs time to figure out being a lead guard in the NBA. That's just a fact because he's not done it. And Thibs can only endure that for so long until he's like, okay, fuck this, got to go back to Brunson. Like they're trying to win as much as they can now, and they maybe rightfully, I think so, view themselves as a team that is a legitimate contender, and therefore they can't just give guys and gift away minutes and reps. So Ivy is tough for me because I see the talent, but I also watch him a lot of times, and I'm like, dude, you are fucking silly. You're silly. Like you're just
it's not a great environment. I don't think. People have speculated that Monty's pretty much trying to get fired. And I guess to the point, I definitely agree they're definitely not in flyer mode. I think Ivy's a little bit complicated just because I don't think work ethic or those kind of things have ever been brought up as issues for him. He obviously, and some of the skills you're talking about, kind of the decision making and all that, he just flat out has not been in the kind of environment. Let's be real. Cade is playing well, but he was a pretty perfect prospect as like that wing creator. He was a really, really highly regarded prospect. So, and that guy had everything made in a lab, the mentality and everything. And even then, it took him quite a while to really thrive here, just because of how much of a shit show they've been. And so I do think in that case, and like I said, they thought the same thing with Cam Reddish and it didn't work out. But he was on a winning team, right? So I think this is a little bit different. I will bring this up. Ivy is actually about almost 5 point. With Ivy on the floor, they do have a negative 8.21 net rating. The defense rating doesn't change, but they're about 5 points better on offense when Ivy's on than when he's off. Which just, I mean, it goes from bad, which is 108, to respectable 113. So again, these are still overall bad numbers. But, I think the reason why, I definitely get the point that they're not in fire mode anymore. They need guys who can help them win now. But I mean, I was thinking about your point, if we're really looking at a 12-month timeline, right? Or they need to get, and by that time, they need to have their third established guy. I could see Ivy being that in 12 months, right? And maybe this is a different avenue to try to, another avenue, especially if we can get them cheap, to try to explore that rather than just saying, whenever Donovan Mitchell comes available or, another guy like that. I also wanted to ask about this guy. Do you think there's any chance that Orlando would trade Cole Anthony?
I don't think so. I think that it's also really hard to trade him right now because he has the poison pill thing going on because he extended. So I don't think they'll trade him right now. I think they might trade him in the offseason, but I don't think they'll trade him right now. And if they do trade him in the offseason, I feel like they'll trade him in a package for, a talent upgrade, maybe probably in the backcourt. But I don't think they'll trade him right now. It'll be really hard for them to get the necessary value they would need from him. He's also one of the few guys on the team that I think is shooting well this year. What is he shooting? I know he was shooting much. I think he was shooting much better earlier. So he's at 34.8% from three, 44.2% from the field. Though. Yeah, he takes a lot of pull-ups. He doesn't get to the rim all the way. He's at just under 57 true shooting, which is just where he was last year too. So if that's his baseline, it's pretty solid for the guard he is.
It's a pretty solid defender too, especially considering his size. So
yes. So I don't think they'll trade him right now, though.
And if they did, it's probably not to the Knicks because, to your point, it's a talent upgrade. The Knicks are probably going to say, we'll give you a pick and maybe Grimes if you want, which, they're probably looking to get more out of that from Cole Anthony. But yeah, I mean, that was kind of just the thinking. If they have this 12-month window within which they have to establish a third creator, I do wonder if the flyer route maybe is one way to just give yourself another chance, even if you're not, as long as you don't have to give up too many assets. But if it's going to cost unprotected, I highly doubt they would go after Ivy. So,
yeah, it's tough. Like the value you need to give up for Ivy for them to want to do it is just not something that I think the Knicks need to save that type of ammo for a star, or at least that's how they're operating. Me and you can disagree, and I kind of do disagree.
They need a really good needle mover, right?
Yeah, that's probably the better way. Like if there's an OG type, like we like DiVincenzo, right? But if there's some like OG level upgrade at that spot, you would make that move. And that maybe that's there. Maybe that will pop up. I don't even know who the fuck that would be. But if that pops up, that pops up. Maybe they could get something like Emmanuel quickly.
Or I was gonna say Derek White too, right? Like that's the point. Yeah. I think that's like that's, we can get into semantics debate, but is that a star to some people? Maybe, but it's just, I think it's I agree. They'd want another OG type trade. I think that would be ideal. So
yeah, I mean, honestly, the Derek White thing is pretty instructive because the Celtics have basically they committed to the idea of Tatum and Brown, Tatanium. I know Tatum and Brown being
Tate Forcinium.
They're like two tent poles on offense, and they've kind of added pieces around them, right? So Derek White, not a star, major needle mover. Drew Holiday, in my opinion, not a star, major needle mover defensively, and I think necessary after they traded Marcus Smart. Porzingis might be a star. He's a weird. It's weird. He's like a weird one. So like we could say star, but not a star in the sense of
it's in the market and mold.
Yeah.
So maybe uniqueness he gives you, right?
Yeah, and so and maybe the Knicks have stumbled across that with Hartenstein. You know what I mean? Like he's obviously different from Porzingis, but what he's given them offensively has been kind of eye-opening.
And defensively, he's like the top
yeah.
of the league in rim protection, right? So
I think he's top in EPM right now, defensive EPM. I think he's 100th percentile. So I can look it up right now. But like when you have that, oh wow, yeah, he's 100th in defensive EPM, 93rd overall EPM. But like given that, so if he's that, and OG is OG, and Brunson is Brunson, and Randle is what we hope Randle can be in the playoffs, maybe you don't need another. Like maybe that's the argument to not go out and like only obsess about superstars. And to their credit, that hasn't been like they haven't, right? Like OG's not like they didn't. There are a lot of people that were like, well, once the OG trade happened, I actually didn't feel this way, even though I was kind of critical of it in real moments. But like the real that were like, well, if you gave this up for OG, why don't you just do the Donovan Mitchell trade? And it's like I don't really get how that's the same thing, considering they didn't give up any draft capital in this trade, really. But anyway, like they were more willing to give up things for OG than they proved to be for Donovan Mitchell, at least, paying up the price that was asked. And they waited it out, right? They waited out this OG thing until it came to a price where they were like, okay, we're comfortable making this trade. So maybe it's about finding that level of player, but at the 2 that you really are looking for here. Because if you can keep Hartenstein, it changes a lot. And maybe hell, who the hell knows? Maybe Grimes makes a leap and not just Grimes. That would be fantastic. But either way, like they have the ammo. Like I don't think to get the type of player that is an OG Anunoby at the 2, as good as OG is, what we're talking about more is like a great connector, right? A great connector at the 2 who is a superior defender, maybe than DiVincenzo, more flexible, maybe better on the ball, better with the ball in their hands as well. But like that type of player generally doesn't cost you an arm and a leg. Might cost you like
he's not available. I think a guy like Austin Reeves. I think he's good enough there, right?
Maybe his defense is pretty bad next to Brunson. That would be problematic. But the offensive idea of him, sure, yeah. And even then, like what that might cost you like 3 fingers. It'll hurt. It'll hurt a little bit, but like you can still, it's nothing but a flesh wound. But like you could, and you'd still have the capacity to sacrifice more appendages and limbs if need be down the line to upgrade your roster, which is kind of what the Celtics have benefited from. Is that their big needle moving moves have not cost them a shit ton. They still have some picks to trade. Like they still have some contracts going into next year that they can move. Like so, they have options. The Knicks have options. They've made their first needle moving trade. They probably need to make 2 or maybe 1 or 2 more to get into that true contender level. But they have that ability. So it's it'll be interesting to see how they move forward. I'm actually pretty excited for it because they finally kind of picked a lane. They were trying to straddle too, right? Being competitive, developing talent. And not to say that they've completely eschewed development. I do buy that part of this trade was to give more time to Grimes and McBride. Now, is that because they believe in them as like future stars or something? I doubt it. But even if the motivation is we need to put these guys in the shop window, up their value, so when we look to make trades and upgrade, these guys can be potential pieces that help us achieve that. I get that.
And I do expect them to make at least 1 draft pick this year too, right? So I think it's also.
I think they're
going to need some cheap. They'll need at least 1 or 2 contributors who can contribute above their salary, right? So you need to reset some of those rookie deals. Grimes will be up for extension. Quickly's gone. RJ got extended, so they need to start bringing in some rookies as well at some point. And so the development thing is never. I mean, you have to be doing both realistically, right? I think they leaned more into kind of the. Now is the time, but I think that's kind of my big takeaway from all. Like now is the time, whether or not they make another big trade. You're here. This is not. We're happy to be here anymore when they're in the playoffs, and that even if they go against Boston.
Yeah, for sure. All right, I think that's a good place to end it. Stacy, let the people know they can find you. Plug anything you'd like to plug.
You can find me at Stacy Patton 89. Just say congratulations, Shwin, on a well-earned AFC East crown. And not all of us are lucky enough to be watching teams that are functional even at this point in the year, but that was sure for you and a lot of Bills fans is great. And go blue.
Yes, go blue. It was definitely great to watch the Bills own the division again, and also that also to just do it against Miami on the road and see them piss away a division that they really should have never pissed away. But they can't beat good teams, and the Bills have actually been good against good teams.
It takes two at tango, so you needed them to play their role in that. So
yes, they're role playing for the Bills. I'm excited, and we'll see. The playoffs should be good this year. I still think Baltimore's really good. I think the Bills can beat them, but we'll see.
Are we getting a double Harbaugh championship this year?
Let's get the first one. I don't care too much. I hope not the second one, but the first one is the first step, and it's the most important one. So let's get that done, and then we can talk about the double Harbaugh Super Bowl, fucking NCAA championship duo. But that is our pod for today. I hope everybody has a great week. Thank you to our sponsor, Bet Online, and go blue. And I will see you all on Friday.